right, it's 3 o'clock. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Siri. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Foundations, Inc. And I want to thank you all for joining us for another one of our Beyond School Hours National Education Conference follow-up webinars. Before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of background about Foundations, Inc. We are a national education nonprofit. We're located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. So we work across the school day. We work in after-school programs, schools, with school districts, and at the state level to create a brighter future for every child every day. And if you're interested in more information about Foundations, Inc., just take a minute to follow us on social media. We'll make sure that information is in the chat box. Thank you, Paula. And you might already know us from our signature professional learning event, the Beyond School Hours Conference. Our conference is held each year in February, and we're so excited that in 2022, we're going to be back in Orlando, Florida. So we hope you will all join us. The registration is open. Please take a look. We've got a lot of really exciting things planned, and we're really excited to come back together again for the conference. So now I would like to welcome Paloma Mayorga. She's a training communication specialist at Westat. And Paloma is going to share some innovative ways to develop student voice through tabletop role-playing games. So thanks, Paloma, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. Without further ado, I would love to get into the actual content, developing student voice through tabletop role play. So thank you very much for joining us today. We have a few simple objectives that we're going to achieve today in this webinar. Number one being to discover that tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs for short, are simple tools to engage and inspire youth and discover resources and guidance available to implement them in your after-school programs. Two, you're going to build confidence as you observe that running a TTRPG is actually a fairly simple task through a hands-on learning experience and a live mini game that we're going to be having a little bit later on in the session. And three, you're going to leave with a strong idea on how to start a TTRPG club, develop a curricula, and even more on your campus, all for free with open source resources and a little bit of creativity on your part. And no worries, anyone who doesn't want to turn on their camera because they're with children right now, we totally understand, only if you're able and comfortable. So a little bit about me. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the brief introduction. Again, my name is Paloma Mayorga. I'm a training and communication specialist with a company called Westat. We hold the training and technical assistance contract for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant in Texas, which we've rebranded to Texas Afterschool Centers on Education, or Texas ACE for short, because the 21st century thing is a whole huge mouthful. But a little bit more about me. A few of my passions are storytelling. I really have always enjoyed math. I really like complex systems and like gaming and all that kind of thing. And I also really like being in charge. Does anyone want to take a stab in the chat at perhaps what all of these things have in common? Yeah, Paula's right on it. I am a dungeon master. I love talking about Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPGs. And anytime anyone allows me to pepper it into a normal conversation, you can bet that I will talk about it for hours. But today we are lucky that it actually has a lot of applications in the after school space in terms of developing kids' problem solving skills and their internal voice and confidence. So I'm hoping to talk about it a little bit more with you today. So for those of you who already know a little bit about D&D, please feel free to post in the chat or any other TTRPG your level of familiarity with it. But for those of you that are not familiar at all, I can give you a quick crash course on it. So a tabletop role-playing game is a system for navigating an imaginary world. Like, now imagine any video game that you've seen, that you've either played or that you've seen people around you playing, like World of Warcraft or Skyrim. The developers that made those games have a lot of algorithms in the back end that are just code that determine the probability of being able to hit an enemy and how much damage you're going to do when you hit that enemy and whether or not it's a critical hit and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's the system. And in a tabletop role-playing game, that system gets dragged out of the computer and put onto paper, and elements of randomness and destiny are determined by the roll of a dice. So it's actually math disguised as World of Warcraft, because there's a lot of addition and subtraction and other kinds of basic arithmetic that gets done just all the time in games like these. But at its core, what tabletop role-playing games are a social storytelling game. You really can't play by yourself. You have to be part of a group. And you can play by yourself, but that's basically writing a novel. You're going to imagine this whole story by yourself, right? It's very difficult to do just on your own. And it does really require a group of friends that are willing to enter this imagined plane. So Dungeons and Dragons itself was invented in the 80s, and it was really, really popular for a time, but then it fell off. But recently it's actually had a huge resurgence in pop culture for a number of reasons. Not only has it been featured in several like really prominent TV shows like Stranger Things and Community, the IT Crowd, other things like that. There's also this thing called actual play shows, which is where people actually get together in groups and actually play, as the name would imply, these tabletop role-playing games, and they stream them for audiences to follow along in the adventure. And these have reached massive popularity in recent years, with one of the biggest ones called Critical Role actually starting a Kickstarter to get an animated series based off one of their campaigns. It got picked up by Amazon Prime after smashing Kickstarter records. Like on the very first day, they raised like $5 million, and then Amazon picked them up for 2 seasons. So that should be coming out soon. But there's also that third bullet there of influencers and creatives. There's tons of like very popular influencers and creatives, like the bullet says, that are huge D&D and in general fantasy and tabletop role-playing nerds, like Stephen Colbert, for instance. So you can see there's a very fanciful artwork as him as a bard up there in the top right corner. But we have to ask ourselves, is this all? Is it just because famous people like it that's why it's getting so popular these days? And I would argue that the answer is no. The most important reason that there's been such a huge resurgence with the youth and honestly like young adulthood and middle-aged individuals and other people who are rediscovering it from their youth is that the most priceless part of it is that there is actually a sense of belonging. Like I mentioned before, it's a social storytelling game. You really can't play without a group of friends that you're willing to go on adventures with and develop and strengthen relationships with each other. So with that being said, I would love to drop us into this video that I put together that gives a little bit more in depth on the background of it and also how it specifically is helping kids today.
They got magic and flair, they got falchions and cunning. They don't see over there, there's a monster incoming. Inspiration is waiting, rise up, don't think twice. Put your fate in your hands, take a chance, roll the dice. Can you answer the call, digging deep in your soul? As the legend unfolds, now it's your turn to roll.
Today, the common thread between D&D players is likely to involve Emmy Awards and literary prizes. Stephen Colbert and writers Ta-Nehisi Coates and Junot Diaz are among the millions of smart, bookish kids who played D&D and shrugged off any sense of panic.
People were bananas. My mom moral panicked. She was way more worried about us getting shanked, or getting caught up in some nonsense. We helped each other without even knowing it, man. I learned an enormous amount about what it meant to be courageous and what it meant to be passionate and the kind of hard moral choices that one needs to make in real life in this kind of fake, sort of imagined plane of action.
And for Diaz, as a young immigrant from the Dominican Republic, the game had special meaning.
This was a revolution. Being a bunch of kids of color in a society that tells us that we're nothing, being permitted under our own power to be heroic, to have agency, to do the hero stuff, to take and be on adventures. There was nothing like it for us. It was very, 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 very impactful.
The American Academy of Pediatrics says that in this media-saturated age, it's important for kids to use their imaginations in free play. And in a twist, the role-playing games that set off a moral panic in the past may look more like a solution than a problem to today's parents.
It's a great thing to dream yourself in other places, and it helps understand who you are. It's just nice to spend a lot of time thinking, imagining, in a group, collaborating.
Bobby is awesome.
Imagination is a good thing, man. very powerful.
D&D diehards have been influencing Hollywood for years. You'd be surprised by how many of the people who make the things that you love were shaped by D&D.
There are so many writers and directors and actors and producers working today who credit, playing this game in the 80s and the 90s for like teaching them the ins and outs of storytelling.
Dan Weiss, who co-created Game of Thrones, he plays in my home game now. Brad Payton, who directed Rampage. The Big Show from WWE Wrestling. Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine. James Gunn, he created the Guardians franchise. They're all coming over to play at my house.
What may be surprising is that for many, it's become a therapeutic tool, teaching social skills to children, helping people in prisons, and even serving as an escape for people in the military.
With Dungeons & Dragons, it's everyone together, and we're all working together for a common goal.
Sure, you're playing a character, but when people discuss their characters around the table, they don't say, do you remember when our group of characters went and did this? They say, hey, do you remember when we did this?
D&D and other role-playing games allow people to create characters that are more like who they want to be, and as such, kind of learn what steps they can take to go that direction.
Now, this idea of playing out a character to improve a personality trait actually comes from the work of the psychologist Alfred Adler. He has a role-playing therapy called the as-if, where if you want to work on your confidence, you act as if you were somebody who you find more confident for a little bit each day. You put on that persona and bring that personality trait a little closer to the surface in yourself. And let me tell you, this happens all the time in tabletop role-playing games. Look a little deeper at that character. What personality traits do they have that you might like a little bit more of in yourself? Every time you played that character, you would be practicing and bringing those a little closer to the surface in yourself. And that's where the magic of these types of games happen. We get to use play to practice our skills in a space that's much more comfortable than any other that life presents to us.
I've seen it help friends of mine with PTSD. When you have something really traumatic happen to you and you can just not be you for 2 to 4 hours, that's like hitting a reset button. Because D&D had nothing to do with this horrible thing that happened that I had no control over, but I have control over this game and playing with my friends. I do feel like D&D can give so much to so many people, and I think it's a very healthy thing because it's a very safe place.
It's about creating new memories and doing it so often that it overtakes all the bad memories. So it's literally creating good memories will heal you from all the bad memories. The D&D, the happiness, the camaraderie, the cooperation is more powerful than fear.
What makes this game so special is that you have 100% of the agency and none of the real-world consequences. You can make yourself a hero, a villain. You can work through your trauma, kill the monster, befriend it, or make it your pet. Or hey, set off a fireball to relieve your work stress. You can live a million lives. And yes, it's imagination, but our minds don't always distinguish between what we imagine and what we live, which may be why this game has actually healed so many.
Awesome. So I always enjoy watching that little video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. I do find it to be a really good tool in sharing about tabletop role-playing games with new people who maybe don't know anything about it at all, or maybe have some preconceived notions about things like Dungeons and Dragons that are not entirely accurate to what the actual core of the game is, right? But the meat of it is, how do tabletop role-playing games help kids? Well, a couple of those topics were covered in the video, mainly in the social skills area with social emotional learning, which we know is going to be one of the top priorities for kids getting back into school, especially for those that have been in a hybrid setting or a completely asynchronous or possibly even synchronous virtual setting for the past school year. It's really important to help those kids be able to find a voice. And this is something that does happen because these games are pretty small. Usually they're played with a group of maybe 4 to 6 people, I would say, is really average. And that's small enough to allow each member of the game to really have a purpose and to find a voice and to be able to speak up with their own ideas. This really builds into the second bullet point, which is building confidence. They're going to get the opportunity to demonstrate that they have ideas on their own, that they can accomplish tasks and help their friends achieve a goal. And like the kilt-wearing individual in that video mentioned, it is based on an Adlerian philosophy where if you you act as if someone who you believe to be more confident a little bit each day, slowly over time, you yourself too will become more confident. And this is true of a number of different aspirational characteristics that people can identify in other people, whether it's to be confident or to be more trustworthy or to gain empathy for others who are dissimilar to yourself. This is another really great one because if kids take the opportunity to either play or interact with characters that are very dissimilar from the people that they have the regular opportunity to interact with in real life, it really gives them a new sense of empathy and a new lens to examine situations. Same thing with developing an identity, with the fact that you can, try on multiple identities, create different characters, explore a whole lot of different stuff. It's a very low stakes place to, develop something that you really feel comfortable with and something that you want to move forward with in real life. And the ability to practice adaptability and resilience. One of the most fun things about the game is the fact that because there are a lot of things represented by randomness, plans are not going to go to plan. There's going to be a lot of failure. There's going to be a lot of mess ups, and you are going to have to learn how to adapt to those in real time because the game moves quickly. It's a game where you're all talking to each other and deciding what happens in real time. So it's a really wonderful realm to be able to practice quick creative problem solving on your feet. Now, on top of all the social emotional learning, what I think people would consider soft skills, there's also some harder practical skills that can specifically relate to after school. For one, it helps deepen reading and listening comprehension. Now, I'm sure you've all heard this figure thrown out there that kids these days have the attention span of a goldfish or something like 6 seconds, right? And then after that, they're tuned out. There's 100% incorrect. Kids can absolutely stay in tune and engaged with a topic, with a group of people, with a subject for hours on ends. The only thing that's missing there is the actual engagement part. You have to make them want to be engaged, right? And then they have the ability to. But these games can often last 3, 4, 5 hours, and it goes by like that. And people don't realize just how much time you've actually spent developing all these skills. And because of all that, you often have to learn how to take notes because something might happen in hour 1 that becomes relevant in hour 4. And nobody remembers that. I personally have a terrible memory, and Dungeons and Dragons is one of the things that has really helped me develop my note-taking skills. So that's another thing that can be applied to kids in particular. Same thing with interacting with reward and consequence. It is a very low stakes environment where the very worst thing that can happen is something called a TPK, also known as a total party kill, where all of you die. And that's pretty horrible, right? Nobody wants their characters to die, but at the end of the day, you just throw those character sheets into the trash, you roll up some new ones and you start again, now having learned a very valuable lesson about what not to do to encounter that TPK. I've mentioned before that this does reinforce math skill standards because there's a lot of die rolling and addition of a bunch of different skills and traits and things like, like magic spell points and things like that. They all get added together. So there's a lot of math skill reinforcement because the kids just have to be able to do it on their feet. Same thing with developing creative problem solving skills. Like I mentioned before, there's going to be situations that really come out of left field that these kids are going to have to think on their feet to be able to solve and practice using their imagination, which we heard from the American Board of Pediatrics, I believe in that video. They said that they really encourage children to use their imagination, free play, and get away from screens, which I know is a really big concern these days for both educators and parents alike. Now, that being said, I do think we've talked about it enough and it's time to just get into it because you can talk about it all day and it still not really make a lot of sense. What exactly is this game? So at this time, I would love if I could have 5 volunteers type into the chat and you'll be selected in order of volunteering. And I think we may have already had Rudy. Yep, there we go. Rudy, you're going to be playing as sibling 1. Meanwhile, I explained the rules of this. Paula, if I could have you go ahead and unmute those individuals who are volunteering so they can speak at will, that would be really excellent. So Rudy, you're going to be sibling 1. So the rules of the game are extremely simple. I see we also have Michael and Jose. Let me write down those names so I have them. Michael and Jose. And someone please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong, although I think I probably got those 3 correct. All right, so the rules of the game. So the dungeon master or the game master, that's me, is going to describe an environment and a scenario for you. In response to that, you as the players have to tell me what you want to do. So I'm going to give you basically a scenario. I'm going to outline a very clear task that you have to accomplish. And you can ask me as many questions as you want to get more information, or you can just tell me that you want to do something. Depending on the difficulty of the thing that you tell me you want to do, I'll either tell you that it happens and narrate the consequences, like number 3 says, or I'll ask you to do a roll first and the results will be determined by that roll. And then this just repeats until we either reach that goal or we run out of time. So one of the things that is going to be important, like I mentioned, that we are going to be doing dice rolls. I'm going to put it in the chat now. Is a dice roller for those of you who don't have a D20 or a 20-sided dice available. Some of you might, but some of you might not, I assume. But for those that don't have it, I'm going to direct you to this website that I just put in the chat. And it's called feastoflegends.com, which is actually the very handy virtual dice roller for the TTRPG developed by Wendy's. That is right. The fast food company has their own TTRPG, Feast of Legends. Basically, all of the characters that you can play are anthropomorphized food. So like there's people from like the Frosty race and the Burger Man and that kind of thing. But when I ask you to roll, we're only going to be playing with one die today, and that's the 20. All you have to do when I ask you to roll is roll the number, and it's going to put a random one here, right? And however many times you click that, that's how many you're going to get. But I'm only going to ask you to click once unless I specify otherwise. And then what you have to do with this number is add our magic number to it. And our magic number today is going to be 7. So for instance, if I ask Rudy to roll something, they roll an 11, I say add that 7, that's going to be a Rudy. Let us know, what is 11 plus 7?
18.
There you go. That is an 18. So Rudy knows how to do basic arithmetic. Thank you, Rudy. All right. And I think we do have 2 other volunteers, Will and Chantel. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Let me write down those names so we have them. Great. So Will and Chantel are our rhyming remaining siblings. Wonderful. Okay. And so that's basically all you have to do. So back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to go ahead and play just like a tiny bit of music to get us in the fantasy mood here. So let me know if you think that's too loud or if that's okay. But basically, let's just go ahead and dive right into the game. This is your family. Welcome, Tinkertop siblings. You are the quintuplet children of Dr. and Chef Tinkertop. Your father is a successful and respected dessert chef, and today he's been talking about this for weeks, so you know that this is happening. A famously hard-to-please food critic has come to pass judgment on one of your father's famous creations. However, being a very nervous individual and stressed to panic attacks, he forgot a few things today. So unfortunately, he has not remembered to gather the most crucial ingredient of his famous superfruit souffle, the superfruit itself. You can see it's so popular, it's even depicted here on their little uniforms. Now, thankfully, luckily, there is a whole magical tree of superfruit in the valley that's growing right behind your restaurant, which also happens to be your home. So that's where all 5 of you are right now. Quick, he turns to you and he says, kids, I need you to run down to that valley and get me 10 superfruits in the next 15 minutes, or there's not going to be enough time to achieve the magical Maillard reaction, which is actually not magical at all. It's just the chemical browning, which creates flavor in the base of the cookie base souffle. And, you know, if I don't have that, the food critic is not going to like the souffle. Our whole family will be ruined. Our restaurant will be going bankrupt and our family will be disgraced. So I really, really, really need you kids to get this together for me. Can you do that for me? All right, siblings, sound off. Can you do that for your dad?
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. You guys also know that there's something very special about your family. You guys are protected by these ancestral spirit guardians who sometimes whisper advice to you on what they think that you should do to achieve your goal. And so for everyone else who is not one of our special 5 volunteers, you are going to be playing the role of ancestral guardians today. If you have any feedback on what you think our heroes should be doing or not doing, feel free to put that into the chat and I will narrate as the voice of their ancestral guardians. So you guys all have a role in this too. All right, but with that said, your father pushes you out the door and he hands you each 2 hatchets, 50 feet of rope, and 1 crossbow with 3 bolts. And he sets a timer on his clock. You have 15 minutes. So you guys run out to the gully behind the house and you see you're up here in the corner and there's a tree maybe 50 feet from you in this direction, 100 feet from you in this direction. You see it's maybe 100 feet tall and about 50 feet up the base of the tree. These fruits start growing. You guys are currently up here. What do you want to do? You can move around, or if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to ask. I'll give you as much information as is appropriate.
I want to go the long way.
Who said that, Jose?
Yes.
Okay, which direction did you want to go? The long way?
The long way.
All right, siblings, are you guys going to follow Jose?
Actually, sure, I'll follow Jose.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So you guys all come down here to the base, running, making really good time. But when you get to about here, you see that the base of this tree is actually covered in this like weird white stringy stuff, and you don't exactly know what it is, but I'm going to let anyone who wants to make a roll. So click that 20, or if for whatever reason you don't want to, I can do it for you and just have you add your number to identify what this stuff on the ground is.
I'll do it.
Go for it.
I just one D20, that's it.
A D20 and then add your modifier, which is 7.
I rolled a 10, so 17.
Excellent. So Jose, you guys know, has always been like really interested in like nature and botany, and can like instantly, just at a glance, you can tell that this stuff is spider silk. It's got a lot of very useful properties, which is why your parents have never eradicated the nest that you know lives around here. But with a roll that high, I'm going to go ahead and say that you also remember that these spiders that produce a specific kind of silk, they have a favorite kind of food, which happens to be these superfruits themselves, which could explain why it's all around the base. So knowing that, you can either choose to share that information with your siblings or not, since you're the only one that knows right now. But please feel free to talk to each other, interact, come up with a plan. Let me know if you want to do anything. Otherwise, go at it.
Yeah, I know what it is. So because I know what it is, y'all should go get the fruit.
Well, what is it?
It's the watermelon, like, goo. That's what it is. Like,
okay. Okay, Jose, I'm going to have you roll a deception roll. Go ahead and roll and add that number 7 to it to see if they believe it. Everyone else also roll and add 7 to it and tell me what you get. If you manage to beat the number that Jose tells us he rolled, you are going to be able to tell that this is a lie.
I rolled a 12.
Plus 7.
So it's 19.
All right, so you guys have to beat a 19 to know that this is true. Otherwise, you truly believe that these are watermelon roots or something, and that your brother just has your best interest at heart.
I do.
So I rolled 18 plus 7, so I guess, yeah. You're
Okay,
lying.
so Rudy, yeah, Jose is a skilled fabricator of tales, Rudy, but you know, you're quintuplets, you've known each other for your entire life. You know when Jose is trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and you can tell that maybe he just wants to keep himself out of trouble and send you into harm's way instead. But remember, I want to remind all of you that you do have equipment. Each of you has those 2 hatchets, the 50 feet of rope, and a crossbow and 3 bolts each. And the clock is ticking. You guys have a little over 11 minutes left to get these fruits back to your dad.
I would think maybe using one of my hatchets to cut into these spider webs, so I can at least reach to the trunk of the tree.
All right.
The bark of the tree, I guess.
Wonderful. So Michael, taking charge, being the natural born leader that he always is, takes out his 2 hatchets and starts hacking at these spider webs. And for a while, you're making like really good progress. You guys even get up right to the base of the tree. But as you do that, you see, or you actually hear first before you see anything, you start to hear a thunk, 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 and slowly over the edge of the scaffolding, I should say, right where you see the river is, where you maybe know the nest is located, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 pairs of legs crawl over the scaffolding as you guys see a giant wolf spider comes onto the screen, or not onto the screen, but comes into the area and prepares to attack you, knowing that touching its webs has triggered its web sense. So it's up here. You guys are about to fight this thing. I'm going to just go in order to let you all have a chance to act. But Michael, since you were the first to act, you are going to go at the end of the list. So right after you is Jose. So Jose, you see that a spider comes up. It's maybe 10 feet away from you guys. So if you wanted to hit it with your axe, you would have to run up to it. If you want to shoot it, you're at a good distance. Or if you want to ignore it entirely and do something else, that's up to you. But please let me know what you want to do.
Can I use a rope as a lasso and try to ride one?
You absolutely can. Although you do hear this like cold in the back of your neck, right at where your spine is, and it trickles up to your head, and you hear this voice just to enter your head, and you hear, use the crossbow. You know, but you know best. These people are dead. They don't know what they're doing, right? They'd be alive if they knew what was up. So you are going to go ahead and take that lasso and start swinging it and try and lasso that spider. So go ahead and give me another roll and add your modifier to it. I'm going to say, because this is extremely difficult and you've never done this, you're going to have to meet or beat a 22. So go ahead and roll, add 7 to it, and tell me if you make it.
I rolled a 13 with 7. That's 20.
All right.
No.
So
great idea.
Do you want to say anything to your siblings as you try and do this?
Y'all, look at me. I'm amazing.
So Jose starts like whipping this lasso around and gets the spider, and you actually manage to get it on one of the legs of the spider. You don't miss entirely, you got really close. But the thing is, this spider sees it and it's not happy. It yanks back and you're actually yanked 10 feet forward. So you are now attached to this rope by a spider right in front of it. And that is your turn. Next up is going to be Will. Please let us know what you want to do. You just watched your sibling attempt to do something awesome and then get dragged right into the clutches of this spider.
I'm going to use my hatchet.
Okay. You're also about 10 feet away. So you want to run up there?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So go ahead and roll that D20 and add the 7 for me. Let me know if you exceed a 15. That's going to be its armor class, which is what you have to meet or beat to attack it.
I did. I had a roll of 19, and then with my 7, so I'm at 26.
Amazing. So that is super high. So let's say you get 2 whacks into it and you go whack, whack, and you actually manage to fully chop off the leg that is attached to the rope. So let's say, Jose, you get your rope back and Will, you have done enough damage to this thing. So it starts to like recoil a little bit, but it's not exactly done. In fact, it looks a little bit angrier now that you've done that. All right, Chantel, what do? You've just seen 2 of your brothers run up and like immediately engage this thing.
Well, I don't want to run in brothers, so possibly crossbow.
Crossbow. Okay, excellent. So you take out one of the bolts and you load it into your crossbow and you take this spider in its sights. Where are you aiming for in the spider?
His head.
Sorry, its back?
No, his head.
Oh, his head. So like right in his face. Okay, great. So go ahead and roll that D20 for me and add a 7, or I can roll for you if you like. But just let me know what you get.
Yeah.
You have to beat a 15, just like Will, to hit it.
What you got?
3.
A 3 plus 7?
Yeah.
All right, so you are aiming, but you're like a little bit trepidatious. You see your 2 siblings there, and you're not quite sure that you can aim correctly. And unfortunately, your nerves just get the better of you, and you shoot it off, and you end up shooting Jose right in the shoulder. Jose, you have been shot. You have a spider leg now attached to this rope, and you see your siblings are trying to come to your aid, but maybe you guys were not as prepared for this as you thought you were. Thank you, Chantel. Rudy, what are you gonna do?
Okay, all of us are trying our best to fight them, but since it doesn't seem to be working at all, I just kind of want to, let's see, I forgot. I should have been taking notes for that. But are there any weak spiders?
Well, there's only the one spider. There's only one spider. It's really big, though. I'd say it's like about the size of you. Like for reference, let's say you guys are this big. This is how big this spider is. So it's pretty large, but it's gotten one good hit on it, and you see that it's bleeding pretty profusely, but it's big.
Okay, I want to study it for a bit, try to see if there's any weaknesses, because we're struggling too much without knowing anything.
Okay, I'll give this one to you for free. If you can take off at least half of its legs, so you know that's 4 out of 8. The division of half, you're going to totally incapacitate this thing. If you also manage to get a headshot, you're going to kill it instantly.
Okay, so do I just roll?
Well, it depends on what you're going to do. All you did was ask for information. What would you like to do?
I'll go for the leg.
With what?
With the crossbow.
With the crossbow. Okay, so you're going to try and shoot the leg. That's a little bit smaller, so it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to have to hit a 17. So roll the D20 and add your 7. And if you meet or beat a 17, I'm going to say you get another one of the legs.
Oh, I did. I got it 2.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
With your crossbow, you don't hit Jose this time, but you do hit Will, unfortunately. So both Will and Jose, you've got like a crossbow bolt sticking out of you, which is great. They didn't go over the edge or anything, so you still have those available to you. But that's going to be Rudy's turn. So Michael, we are back to you. You have your hatchets in hand. You set this whole thing off by just hacking at the web. What would you like to do?
Let me use the crossbow, actually.
Excellent.
And I'll probably go aim it for its stomach or abdomen area.
Okay, great. Go ahead and roll that D20, add your modifier of 7, and let me know what you got. You're aiming for a 15 or higher.
Okay. I got a 10, so 17.
Amazing. So because there has already been a leg hacked off and everyone's surrounding it, and you managed to shoot this thing right in the stomach, it's actually about to rear up and try and get Will, who's like bleeding profusely. It like smells this blood and it wants to get him. But right as it rears up, you like aim up your sights and you get it right in the stomach. And this is such a forceful shot that you actually managed to like knock this thing fully off of the platform. Luckily, it's still not attached to your brother via a rope, but you have managed to defeat the spider. Well done. So that is the spider threat, but you guys now only have about 4 minutes left to get 15 of these fruits. But the threat has been eliminated. So how would you guys like to gather the rest of these fruits? Like I said at the beginning, tree is about 100 feet tall, fruits start about 50 feet up. And we're not in order anymore, so you guys can just tell me what you want to do, collaborate.
I would think about taking the rope and attaching it to one of the arrows in the crossbow and shooting it upwards.
Okay, what are you shooting towards?
For a branch, hopefully a branch high enough so we could climb up.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to say that's pretty easy. You only have to meet or beat a 12. So roll your D20 and add 7 to it. Tell me if you meet or beat 12.
I got a 10 again.
10 plus 7. Excellent. So with the 17, you guys see that your brother, Michael, not only is he a natural born leader, but it seems that he's the only one that practices with his crossbow. So he shoots the spider off the ledge and then immediately goes to the top, quickly reloads a crossbow bolt and shoots in a rope attached to an arrow up there. And so you guys now have a sturdy climbing mechanism. What do the rest of you do?
Climbing the tree.
Chantel, did you say climbing the tree?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, if you would like to do that, I'm going to say because there is a rope there, you don't even need to roll for this. You managed to get at the top of the tree. And if you want to start searching for fruits, what do you do once you're up there with the fruits?
I think I'm going to take my hatchet and start chopping the fruit off the limb.
Excellent. And just let them drop or catch them?
I'm going to see if my brothers can catch them.
I'm right below. I can grab.
Okay, excellent. Because Chantel and Will are working together, Chantel, go ahead and give me a roll of that D20 and we'll see how many fruits. No modifier this time. This is just how many fruits you managed to get in your immediate surrounding area to see if you need to climb any higher or lower. Remember, you need 10 fruits.
Click on the 20 guys?
Yeah.
18.
18. Amazing. So more than enough than you need. Like they're just really right in this area. It seems like Michael really picked like a good spot to shoot this arrow. You managed to like start hacking these and dropping them down. So Will, let's see how many of these you managed to catch without dropping them on the floor. Go ahead and roll that D20 for me. Add your 7. Let's say that you're trying to meet or beat a 16 because, you know, she's about 50 feet up. This is coming at you fast and furious. 18 of them.
All right. I just rolled. I got a 12. So added my 7. I got 18.
Amazing. So that beats the 16. So a 19. So yep, you were better at math than me, revisionist. But yeah, with about a minute and 30 seconds left, Will, like a ninja in like a fruit catching game, manages to catch the stuff. And Jose might be bleeding out. You know, nobody thought to look back at him. Although Will also has an arrow in his shoulder, and even with that, he has managed to catch all these fruits. So you know, maybe that's something you guys got to take up with your parents. Maybe have them teach you a little bit of healing skills next time you go out to face some giant spiders. But I will say that you guys were successful in getting your fruits. You guys managed to run all the way back home with about a minute left. Exactly enough time and success. Your family is so proud of you. Your dad knows that you guys pulled it together for the family. He knows that he can trust you to keep the family defended. And with the help of your ancestral guardians, you guys are going to make really smart choices because you may or may not have told him the full truth of what happened down here there. But he doesn't care, you know, because all he cares about is that you got those fruits back. He's making the dessert. Your family and your restaurant are saved. If you guys had not made it back in time, everyone would have been really sad. But thankfully, you all did. So thank you so much to everyone for your participation. As you can see, most of the game is just thinking up scenarios and trying to do fun stuff, and then letting the dice make decisions for you in times where you don't necessarily know the outcome because it's a difficult role, or you're just trying to make it a little bit more interesting. But with that said, I know that we only have about 20 minutes left, and I do want to make sure you guys have enough time to look at these resources and ask any additional questions that you have. So let's just move right along. What can you do with TTRPGs now that you know about them, now that you feel at least comfortable enough about them to talk about them? The simplest thing to do is to just organize a TTRPG club in school and let the kids run for it. You know, you don't need to be serving as the game master, as the dungeon master, as anything. You can just provide the supplies to the kids and let them go at it. Whichever kid is the most vocal, really wants to be the most in charge, let them take on the dungeon master role. Or if you don't really necessarily have anyone like that, maybe take turns. Every week, a different kid has to take on that role just so they can get comfortable with the experience of putting a game together and running it. You can also veer into the space of family engagement with a family game night, either where you put together a quick game, kind of like what we just did, with very few rules to just get the family introduced to it and comfortable with the concept, or you can flip it on its head and have the kids, again, be the dungeon masters for their parents and take them into a world of their own creation and go through that. You can design special sessions to help kids get specific experiences that they need to grow, and a little bit more about this in a few slides. But another thing that I think is extremely cool is, because this is just a storytelling game, right? You can take any story, you can take any archetype and put the kids inside of it. So you actually have the opportunity to allow students to interact with a literary text firsthand by placing them into a world that is based on those stories. And I actually have an example of that from a very excellent website that I'll give you in a resource later, called Teaching with Dungeons and Dragons. But this is an English AP class where the kids went into Beowulf for the D&D game. So I would like to share that with you now.
So basically we've decided to run, well, I decided for them, that we're going to pair Dungeons and Dragons with our classic text from our Brit Lit course. The idea is that all of the campaigns fit in with what's going on with the text. So for instance, my students just had to traverse the moors and then find the lair of the sea witch, or Grendel's mother, since we're going through Beowulf right now. So it's pretty neat because I have the ability to actually put them in the text and then include questions and little things throughout the story that incorporate like elements of plot, analysis, diction, syntax, imagery, and all of that. So it's kind of a cool way to immerse ourselves, and it's just something different, and it really gives us a lot of laughs. Okay, so I was having ideas. Now I know that during gameplay, right, since some of us are huddled in, not all of us are talking. So I'm going to try a little better to be when another group goes, a person who has not spoken has to speak up that time, so we can get that rolling through.
And we're going to move 10 pieces things, put it in it so you can look and see what it is.
Okay. As Lenora traipses through the underbrush to see if she has footing, right, amongst the rocky hillside, we're going to have to do a dexterity check. So what is your dexterity modifier? Do you know?
So today in class we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and this relates to our English work because we're currently reading Beowulf, which is based in medieval times, similar to the setting of most C&D campaigns. We're able to illustrate the villains and other characters in the story through using them as enemies or in-game characters. This is generally better, so that way we can connect to the game itself better.
I think the game's beneficial to us because we get more experience with the characters and we get more familiar with what we're doing and stuff like that. So yeah.
Right, so pretty cool. You can do a lot with it. And I did see a couple really great questions in the chat. The first one was from Will with asking, with younger students being the dungeon master, are there a base set of rules that encourages the student who is the dungeon master to be realistic or fair about the required dice roll for that play? Well, I will go ahead and tell you that the answer to that is right here on this next slide. Practical tips for getting started. The most important rule is to have fun. It is actually written into the rules of Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and most other tabletop role-playing games, that rules is written. They're just suggestions. If they're not going to make the game fun for you, if they're not going to make it engaging, if they're too complicated and annoying, you don't really care about weight carrying capacity limits, you don't care that you have to eat a meal every day to regain all your hit points, if all that stuff is boring and just a nuisance, ignore it. The point of the game is to have a good time with your friends. Same thing with the dice rolls. It is good. I don't know that there's anything specifically written on like what is allowed and not allowed to set a difficulty class, a DC, which is that number that you have to meet or beat in order to accomplish a task. There are suggestions though to say that, a 10 is a basic roll. Any person in this world, any random villager from a town could probably accomplish a 10. It's not something that takes a super feat of heroism. And you go from that scale of like 0 to 20, you can go above 20 if it's like a truly difficult feat. But that's something that you and the kids will just get a feel for the more that they play. And in terms of being realistic and fair about it, I think it's your role as the educator to encourage them to be realistic and fair about it, because if they're just setting really, really difficulty classes and nobody can accomplish anything ever, it's not a fun game, right? And you have to ask them, and they have to ask themselves, what are they doing to the environment? Because again, the whole point of this is to create a story together, to have a really good and engaging time together. It's not necessarily about the dungeon master killing everyone in the party or the party managing to destroy all the monsters of the dungeon master put in front of them. It's about being collaborative and really achieving a goal together. So that is really another question / comment from Jacqueline, wondering about this type of interaction looking different due to COVID safe practices. I will say that there are a lot of incredible resources for playing this game virtually. So virtual tabletops with little markers you can move around, and we'll get into a few of those later when I get into like the hard resources. And then Dale saying, are girls interested in this? Looks like a boy thing. Am I crazy? Well, I would say that it's not entirely accurate. I myself, you may or may not be able to tell, am a girl, and I freaking love this stuff. I know many women who also really like playing. There's lots of young girls who also really enjoy playing. It depends on the type of game, right? So if it's like a really crunchy game where it's a lot of numbers and crawling through dungeons and stuff, that might cater more towards some audiences than others. But if the cases you just want to get everybody playing, right, then maybe those games have to be tailored more to those interests. So maybe they want to do more diplomacy and role play, and they have to like do sneaking around and spy stuff, and they don't necessarily want to be engaging with the monsters all the time. But yeah, I would say that there's a lot of people, both men and women and non-binary individuals, who are interested in this just for the sheer community aspect of it. It's not necessarily a boy or girl thing, All right, so that being said, I do want to share these two incredible examples that I found online of like ways that people specifically crafted games to get kids experiences that they needed. I'm going to go ahead and just read them to you in a truncated version, but if you're interested in reading like the full thing, please feel free to download the presentation after the fact. I will give you a link for it. So on the left, I run a D&D club at my school that is predominantly Hispanic, and one student came up to me explaining that she was really quiet during a game because she didn't know how to say certain phrases in English. I thought about this for a second, and I asked her a few questions about her character's background. She was a noble high elf, and then I suggested as part of her background that her noble high elf family didn't allow her to learn Common, which in this case we're going to represent as English, which explains why she only knows so much of it. I then proposed to the rest of the players in the game if we could make Elvish the same as Spanish, so that she can express questions in the game in Spanish and have one of our other half-Elven or Elven Spanish speakers ask the question in English to the group, so that this way I'm helping my student learn English while also giving them something unique and special about their character. The last thing I want is a kid thinking they cannot play because of a language barrier. This game is for everyone. So I just think that's a really powerful example that you just need to be a little bit creative about incorporating these real life obstacles to give them opportunities to explore ways to overcome them in the game. And again, because this is a really low risk environment, the very worst thing that's going to happen is everyone dies and you start over, right? It's not that big of a deal. It's a really excellent way to get kids past some of their boundaries or some of their hangups in that way. On the right is a very similar story. This is from the comment section of a therapist website who actually uses tabletop role-playing games in therapeutic sessions with students. And this is from a parent saying that he's had a very similar experience with his own daughter. My daughter is gifted and she sees a therapist every other week, which helps a bit, but it's not a cure-all. A while back, I decided to experiment a bit and run a homebrew campaign where my wife and children created their own characters and I was the game master. Everyone was having fun until my daughter's character decided to get into a conflict with a non-person character, also played by me. She made a big mistake and was confronted with a decision. She needed to apologize to this NPC or be left outside of the city walls away from the party. This might not be a big deal to most, but my daughter has troubles with conflict and struggles with the most basic attempts to apologize. In the end, fighting back tears, she said she was sorry and rejoined the rest of her group. We had worked with her for years on this with very little success, and in just a few moments, a huge hurdle in her young life was overcome because of a little game. I was so proud of her. Who would have thought that this game could do so much good? Keep up the good fight. From a father called Rob. So that's just another example where, if you set up a scenario where, again, it replicates or simulates an obstacle that this student is encountering in real life, it can give them an option to try out different, simulations of ways to overcome this obstacle and give them tools that they're going to be able to use in real life. So that being said, I would now love to get into the actual nitty gritty resources that I'm going to give to you guys. I'm going to post a link in the chat. This is for a Padlet, which has everything I'm about to share with you on it. But if you would prefer to just scan this QR code and get to the resource directly, you are also free to do that. The very first one is resources to support efficacy. Like I mentioned before, there are a lot of preconceived notions about what Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games are and represent. And this is going to be a really good sheet of resources that kind of help you dispel that myth in case you need any assistance getting a program like this established in your school or in your after school program. There are links to actual psychology papers exploring this idea of Adlerian constructive integration, which is again that idea that if you want to develop a characteristic in yourself or in your students, all that they have to do is emulate someone who they believe to have that characteristic already for a little bit each day. So in other words, role playing. There's also a few articles on the rise of the professional dungeon master, and this way you can actually tie in a little bit of college and career readiness in case this is something they want to pursue long-term. It turns out that they really love it. Can I put it back on the QR code? Chantel, if you go to that link that I posted in the chat, it has the link already on that document. So it'll be a little bit easier for you to get to than going back to the QR code. And due to time, I'd like to just keep moving forward. Hopefully that's okay. There's also a few other videos on there just talking about how this game really is for everyone. There's one in the corner here with Joe Manganiello. Some of you might recognize him from True Blood or a couple other movies. He's a very famous actor now, but he's not someone that people would immediately think would love something like Dungeons and Dragons or he's storytelling based, right? Because he's got more of that jock persona. But that's a video that's really helpful in kind of breaking down some of those stereotypes. So anyone and everyone who enjoys stories, who enjoys playing with their friends, they are going to have an opportunity to enjoy tabletop role-playing games, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or another system entirely. Okay, so here we have tools for running a low-cost game, which is again in that Padlet. So this has got a whole list of stuff for running a game in person and online. Like I mentioned before, the very first one that I want to point out is this one called 5e Tools right here. So what this is an online repository of literally everything that Dungeons and Dragons is specifically. So for players, here are all the things they might need to create a character. For the Dungeon Masters, they not only have the rules and the adventures, so every published module that's out there, you don't need to write your own story or anything. There's pre-existing campaigns that these kids can play. Those are all online for free, as well as a monster manual. Although I will say, if this is something you guys are interested in getting in your schools, investing in a copy of the books could be really nice because they're nice. They're hefty books. They've got really beautiful illustrations inside of them. And it's just a physical object that the kids can get really into if they like. Another thing I want to point out here is the Teaching with Dungeons and Dragons. This is where that video about Beowulf is posted. That's where it came from. They also have a lot of other great ideas for integrating it into a more school system where you're not necessarily playing the game, but you're tying in to the school day there. In the bottom is Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop. This is what I mentioned before for Jacqueline. If you want to play online, this is a way to do it. Basically, as you can see here in this very small thumbnail, there's a gaming board and there are pieces that can be moved around. And it's also got virtual dice rollers and a whole set of integrated rules and all this other stuff in it. So you can play a full game online while still observing social distancing and COVID safety precautions. Another thing I do want to point out is that a lot of people sometimes are trepidatious about introducing tabletop role-playing games to a younger audience because they think it's a little bit too high level for them to understand. But just like I demonstrated earlier, where you don't necessarily have to use all of the rules if you don't think they're appropriate for your players, if you don't think they're appropriate for the most fun and conducive game possible, you can just strip out as much as possible. I would say that if you think a kid is old enough to be told a story at bedtime and then be interested enough about it to ask one question, that kid is old enough to engage in some kind of tabletop role-playing. And these resources that I have linked, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of D&D, are really good for introducing these concepts to really young kids. And then here, the Young Adventurers collection. This is basically a copy of the official books, but with more illustrations and bigger fonts. So it would be more appropriate for older elementary or younger middle school students. All right, and last, ideas for assignments and activities. This is a fun one because let's say you want to run a club, but you guys only actually get to play the actual game once a week. What are you going to do those other 3 or 4 days? There's a lot of other stuff that you can do that ties into Dungeons and Dragons, and maybe gets them to develop the world for themselves a bit. So one, the creative writing exercise. Let's say you have a group of 20 students who are in this club, and you have one adventure for all of them to play, right? Split them up into groups of 5 with 1 dungeon master and 4 players, and have them each play through the same adventure, but have them take notes on the ways that they solved these problems. Like, I've run this game that I did for you guys so many different times, and never once have 2 different groups accomplish the goal in the same way. It's always really different and unique. So a fun thing to do is, if each one of these groups of students take notes on the way that they specifically solved their game, and they come back and they write a story about it, they can share it to each other, and you can really demonstrate the power that certain choices have on the overall story. So that's pretty cool in my opinion. Family game night, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Logic sequencing in game. So this is a really cool one where I think a lot of people have got like cublets or any of these other like STEM-based toys, right, that are based on problem solving, but in the real world. You can incorporate that into the game. Let's say your adventurers are in a dungeon and they have to get past like a puzzle or a trap or a riddle, and you represent that by, in the real world, they have to solve some logic sequencing problem with cublets. And once they do that in the real world, it's representative of their characters having solved this trap riddle in a dungeon or something like that. So there's a lot of way to integrate other learning into it and kind of trick them into learning, for lack of a better word, right? School day aligned one shot, that's pretty much like the Beowulf thing. Basically, you design like a 1 session that puts them into a literary world. Creating character art, really fun. If you have kids that like drawing and stuff, personally, I love drawing. So whenever I play with my friends and family, I always like design them little characters, and then I print it out and put it on cardstock. So these are like little physical tokens that cost literally pennies to make. Right there on bullet 3 on the right side, building low cost minis and sets. You can make it all out of paper. You don't need to spend a bunch of money to make them really integrated into the world. And if they like drawing themselves, that can be one of the tasks for the kid. Hey, design us a map. Hey, design us a monster. Hey, design some character art. Picking music to set a mood is really cool in terms of, you know, like media production and design and sound design and all of that. It also touches on these elements of college and career readiness, where like this is a thing that people professionally do for movies and games and all this other stuff, right? There are sound designers, and you can talk about those themes when deciding what music you want to play in the background for your session. Like, do you want people to feel angry or scared or happy or whatever it may be to enhance your game? And then I skipped around a little bit, but I think this one is really important. The Accents 101. It's a good opportunity to discuss preconceived bias with your students. So for instance, a lot of people tend to associate more rural accents with less intelligent people, right? You can flip this right on its head. Let's say you have your students, your adventurers meet a character who's like the top scientist of their world, who's like the most intelligent, powerful wizard, and they have like one of these accents that people would not normally associate with like a very intelligent individual, and they get flipped on their head. You know, it turns out this person is the smartest person in the entire world. Why did you think otherwise? And it's an opportunity to discuss why they felt that way, and an opportunity to discuss preconceived biases and notions in your students and in the world around us. So I think just with a little bit of creativity, it really opens up so many different possibilities for engaging with your students on like a creative level. And one of the greatest things about it is that you can toss this mostly to the kids. You don't need to spend hours planning a game and running it for them. You just give it to them and let them run it and just supervise and make sure it's going in a positive direction. But it's a really low lift. So I know we ran a little bit up on time, so I would like to give you guys the opportunity to ask me any other questions that you may have, but also I want to pose some questions to you to consider. One, is there a theme or lesson that you've had a difficult time working into your after school program? I would say that tabletop role-playing games, probably a creative way that you would be able to incorporate that. What opportunities for school day alignment are there at your campus? You know, talk to your kids' English teachers, talk to their science teachers. What science concepts can get rolled into the game? Like when I was playing your father, the Tinka Top chef, he was talking about Maillard reactions. That's a chemical concept that you can also incorporate into the game if you just put a little bit of creativity and elbow grease into it. And third, how can you partner locally to maximize TTRPGs in your community? That's a really fancy way of saying, are there any gaming stores that you can reach out to and ask if maybe they're willing to donate like a copy of these books, donate some dice? You know, it's really fun to have physical dice. Kids really love that. They're like really fun, shiny math rocks, people call them sometimes. So it's just another hook to get kids in there. So with that, please, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute if that's allowed now. Otherwise, my contact info is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out. I would love to talk about Dungeons and Dragons or any other tabletop role-playing games. In case you haven't noticed, I can talk about this for hours, and I will talk about it for hours if you want me to. So thank you very much. All right, Dale, glad to hear that. Hopefully we introduced some new ideas today. Rudy, thank you for your participation. You were one of our very excellent Tinkertop siblings. Could not have done it without you.
Thank you, Paloma. This was great. I learned so much, and I had so much fun too watching everybody go through the game. So that was really exciting. And I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules. We really appreciate you joining us for these follow-up webinars. And I hope you will consider joining us again next week, August 18th at 3 p.m. for another of our Beyond School Hours follow-up webinars. I'm going to be hosting a conversation with Dr. Stephen Jones, who's the Associate Dean of Students and Strategic Planning for the College of Engineering at Villanova University. And we're going to be talking about the key steps to successful college readiness. So please come back next week. Also, the registration for Beyond School Hours is open, Orlando, Florida, February 23rd to 26th. I'll bet you'll see Paloma there. You can register now at beyondschoolhours.org. Paul has put that information in the chat. And then if you would, please take a minute to fill out our feedback survey. Feedback is so important to us. We want to make sure that we're growing right along with you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope we'll see you again soon.